Dr. Elias Reed had always believed that time was the purest form of order, the only constant in a chaotic world, a fixed rule, a guiding light. He had spent years ensuring its accuracy, refining the invisible code that governed the countdown every citizen carried on the edge of their vision. Tonight, though, something felt off. The quiet hum of the Kronos Initiative's central facility was the same as it had always been, air conditioning whirring overhead, the soft glow of terminals casting artificial daylight across the sleek, sterile lab. Elias stood before his workstation, scanning lines of cascading data, watching the rhythmic pulse of the numbers that dictated lifespans across the population. The ticker never faltered, never wavered. It was absolute. Until now. He caught it in the corner of his own vision. A flicker, so fast, so subtle he almost doubted it had happened. His own number had glitched for a fraction of a second, a momentary distortion, as though the system had hesitated. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, but the number was stable again. A random error? No, that wasn't possible. The countdown was the foundation of society, a truth encoded deeper than memory itself. His heartbeat quickened. His breaths came slower now, measure controlled, as if forcing himself to stabilize in the face of something imperceptibly wrong. He glanced at the security cameras mounted on the walls. Their red indicator lights blinked steadily, always watching, though they had never felt intrusive before. Now they did. Elias exhaled slowly, turning back to his screen, scrolling through thousands of timestamps, readings, and calibration logs. The system was running flawlessly. No recorded faults, no anomalies, except he had seen it, felt it. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, debating. Reporting errors in the countdown was standard practice, but an anomaly in his own timestamp? That was different. That was personal. Before he could decide, the lights above flickered. The fluorescent glow dimmed for a fraction of a second, brief enough to dismiss, long enough to notice. Then there was a line of text flashing across his monitor, buried deep in the logs. A single phrase, tucked between layers of encrypted sequences, as if someone had whispered a truth into the heart of the machine. Only the chosen remember. Elias froze, staring at the words, his pulse hammering in his ears. A chill ran down his spine, though the room was climate-controlled. He leaned closer, scanning the logs for anomalies, searching for connections, timestamps, patterns. His fingers typed fast, searching for the phrase across all archived records. No results found. That wasn't right. He tried again, altering parameters. Error. Query unrecognized. The terminal refused to acknowledge the phrases existed. His stomach clenched. He leaned back in his chair, the weight of the moment pressing against his lungs. Something was wrong. He had known it the second his timestamp had flickered, but this was confirmation. His screen pulsed. Just once. And the text was gone, like it had never been there at all. Elias had never cared about the ideological battles outside the walls of the Kronos Initiative. The protests, the gatherings, the endless arguments between the religious and government factions. They were just noise, distractions from real work. But tonight, as he walked past the dimly lit corridor near the Central Research Wing, something made him stop. I'm telling you, the logs don't make sense. Mariana's voice was hushed, sharp with frustration. Elias paused, lingering just outside the doorway. He recognized her tone. It was the same edge of doubt he had felt hours earlier when his own timestamp flickered. We aren't supposed to question the inconsistencies, another researcher muttered. Elias didn't recognize the voice. The higher-ups don't want us analyzing what we weren't meant to see. A silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken concern. Mariana exhaled sharply. That's the problem. What if we were meant to see it? What if the system is reacting? Elias stiffened. The system was reacting? He had heard enough. Without a word, he turned and walked back to his lab, his mind racing. He had never questioned the countdown's mechanics. Not until now. But Mariana had noticed something, and it was similar enough to what he had experienced that he couldn't ignore it. For the first time, he felt an unfamiliar sensation creeping into his thoughts, doubt. Back in his workstation, he typed faster than before, pulling deeper into logs, scanning timestamps, looking for anything that should not exist. And then, buried beneath layers of encrypted sequences, he found something. A deleted file. Except, it wasn't fully gone. There were remnants, data fragments that shouldn't be there. It referenced a calibration event on a date that didn't exist in official records. A discrepancy in timestamps, an event erased from history. Elias stared at the screen, heartbeat hammering in his ears. Something was wrong. Elias sat across from Mariana in the break room, the hum of fluorescent lights casting a sterile glow over the empty space. She was focused on her tablet, swiping through reports with tight brows, muttering half-formed thoughts under her breath. She hadn't noticed him yet. That was good. He needed a moment to think. He had never cared for the ideological wars beyond these walls. Religion, government, the endless fights about who controlled the countdown, what all meant. It never mattered to him. But now, after what he had seen, he needed someone who thought like a scientist, someone who questioned before they believed. Slowly, he cleared his throat. Mariana glanced up. Elias, she greeted surprised. Didn't know you actually used this place. I don't, he admitted. His voice was steady, too steady. He could hear the restraint in it. Mariana set her tablet down, leaning back. So, what's got you looking like you've seen a ghost? He hesitated, just for a second. Then, what would you do if I told you the countdown isn't as stable as we think? Her expression barely shifted, but her posture did. She straightened, fingers tapping idly against the table. Define, not stable. Elias exhaled, slowly, deliberately. Something flickered in my timestamp last night. For a fraction of a second. Mariana's tapping stopped. He studied her reaction carefully. No skepticism. No immediate dismissal. Just quiet, calculating thought. Finally, she asked, "Did you check system logs?" Yes. There was nothing, except a deleted file with traces left behind. Like someone tried to erase an event that wasn't supposed to exist. She frowned. How deep did you dig? Elias narrowed his eyes. That's what I was going to ask you. A beat of silence. Then Mariana's lips pressed into a thin line. She reached for her tablet again, typing quickly, pulling up a set of reports Elias couldn't see from his angle. You aren't the only one seeing things, she muttered. Elias leaned forward slightly. Meaning? Her jaw tensed, as though weighing the cost of telling him. Then, finally, I've been monitoring inconsistencies for months, she admitted. Small deviations. Untraceable. Like system-wide anomalies that don't officially exist. His pulse kicked up. She had seen them too. You never reported them. Mariana scoffed. To who? The same people who tell us the system is perfect. Elias nodded once, absorbing the weight of her words. That was it. That was the moment he decided. He could trust her. Not because she believed something outright, but because, like him, she needed proof. And so, he told her everything. Mariana leaned over Elias's terminal, her eyes scanning the fragmented traces of deleted data. This isn't random, she muttered. Someone attempted a system-wide wipe, but they missed something. Elias sat rigid in his chair, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. What happens if we dig deeper? Mariana exhaled slowly, considering. Depends how deep. If this is just a localized error, nothing. If it's tied to core functions, the system might react. Elias heard the unspoken warning in her words. Might react how? Instead of answering, he entered a command. A direct probe. Not the reckless kind, just enough to test the system's response. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the logs rippled. Not literally, of course, but that's how it felt. Lines of code reordered themselves, adjusting, compensating. Like something unseen had felt the disturbance and was correcting it in real time. Mariana sucked in a breath. Did you see that? Elias's pulse kicked up. It adjusted. They stared at the screen, watching as timestamps, calibration logs, and processing cues subtly shifted, like a puzzle reorganizing itself so no piece would be missing. Then, as if acknowledging their interference, a new entry appeared. Not data. Not a diagnostic report. A message. Mariana exhaled slowly, her gaze locked on the terminal. All anomalies will be corrected. The words had vanished, but the tension remained, a weight pressing against the sterile air of the lab. Elias could hear his own heartbeat, the faint hum of the computer, the quiet electricity in the silence between them. This changes everything, Mariana murmured, fingers curling against the table's edge. It confirms something, Elias corrected, but we don't know what. She turned to him, searching his face. Elias, that wasn't a passive correction. It was a response. A response. The weight of that realization settled in his chest. He wanted to argue, wanted to dismiss it as just another automated function, but the truth gnawed at the edges of logic. He had disrupted the system, and the system had acknowledged him. "You're not walking away from this, are you?" Mariana asked. Elias hesitated. Walking away had never been an option. He had to know. And now, Mariana did too. "I'm in," she said, before he could answer. "This is bigger than data inconsistencies. You know that." Elias held her gaze. He did. And if Mariana had seen anomalies long before he did, it meant she had been searching for the truth longer than him. This was no longer his experiment. It was theirs. She straightened, rolling her shoulders, a quiet intensity shifting in her expression. If the system is adjusting itself in real time, that means it's programmed to hide something. Elias nodded. "Then we need to push it harder." Mariana smirked faintly. "Let's see what it's protecting." Mariana adjusted the sensor calibration, her fingers deftly navigating the terminal interface as Elias finalized the script for their first major experiment. The goal was simple: force the countdown to react on a scale large enough to leave behind irrefutable traces. But as they worked, something unexpected surfaced. A file. Corrupted, fragmented, but still readable. Mariana glanced at Elias. "This wasn't in our parameters." Elias frowned. "Then what triggered it?" Mariana pulled it open, scanning the text. The words were encoded beneath layers of system archives, untouched for years? No, longer than that. She read aloud. "The Lord's measure is absolute. The chosen shall be gifted time according to his will." Elias stiffened. "That sounds like doctrine." Mariana's expression darkened. "Not just doctrine. That phrase is identical to one used in religious manifestos outside this facility." Silence settled between them as the implications sank in. "This shouldn't be in the system," Elias muttered. "Unless..." Mariana finished the thought. "Unless someone embedded it intentionally." The countdown had always been considered an impartial force, something beyond human manipulation. But now, had religious leaders engineered this belief into its very code? Before Elias could respond, another alert flickered on his screen. Another file. Another buried truth. But this one was different. Mariana leaned in, her brows furrowing as she read. "Calibration Directive, Government Protocol Alpha, timestamps assigned per regulatory allotment. Extension rights subject to state approval." Elias exhaled sharply. "That's government policy," Mariana finished. Two files. Contradictory. One reinforcing religious doctrine, the other proving government intervention. Elias ran a hand through his hair, pulse hammering. "So what do we do with this?" Mariana met his gaze. "We test the countdown. If these are just old remnants, nothing will happen. But if both sides have their hands in the system, our experiment will force it to reveal the truth." Elias swallowed. "Or destroy our access to it entirely." Mariana smiled faintly. "That's a risk I'm willing to take." Mariana stood beside Elias, arms crossed, gaze steady on the terminal. "You ready?" she asked. Elias exhaled. "As ready as we can be." Their experiment wasn't reckless, just enough to push the system beyond passive corrections. A simulated interference with the countdown's calibration algorithms, designed to mimic an external disruption. Nothing drastic, nothing catastrophic. And yet, the moment he executed the command, something felt different. A ripple, not a physical one, but an unsettling moment of silence in the lab. The air seemed heavier, though nothing had changed. Elias stared at the screen, watching lines of code adjust themselves in real time, reorganizing faster than expected. Then, small deviations appeared. The timestamps adjusted across live feeds, shifting by mere seconds. Almost imperceptible, but there. Mariana frowned. "Look." He followed her gaze. The terminal displaying citizen records had altered. A handful of identifiers flickered, their countdown values moving by margins so tiny they would be dismissed by anyone who wasn't paying attention. But Elias was paying attention. And then, another shift. A name appeared in the records that hadn't been there before. Elias's pulse quickened. "That's not supposed to be there." Mariana stared. "How did we pull a deleted entry?" The name remained for 3 seconds, then vanished as if the system had purged it. Elias sat back slowly, tension creeping into his throat. "We just changed something." Mariana's expression tightened. And something noticed. Elias didn't speak for a moment. His gaze locked on the terminal where the erased name had flickered briefly before vanishing. It had been there, undeniably, impossibly there. Mariana was already typing, her fingers flying over the interface, overriding the security clearance on lower priority data packets. Not enough to trigger alarms, just enough to reach deeper into the fragments left behind. Got something, she murmured. Elias leaned over. On the screen, compressed logs shimmered in partial encryption, remnants of past entries clinging to the system like echoes refusing to fade. The first file Mariana restored was simple, a timestamp with no corresponding record. A missing person. Then another. A series of directives, labeled under an old internal protocol, no longer in use. Elias narrowed his eyes. Protocol Exodus. Mariana's pulse ticked faster. That's not supposed to exist anymore. They opened the file. The text wasn't normal. It was written like a decree, an instruction encoded into the simulation's infrastructure. All souls must pass through the veil in accordance with the divine order. Unauthorized extensions will be revoked. Elias inhaled slowly, his throat tightening. Mariana muttered under her breath. This is exactly what the religious faction claims. Before Elias could respond, another alert appeared. A second document. A contradiction. Directive Amendment 23. Extensions granted at governmental discretion. Unauthorized variant subject to adjustment. Mariana sat back, exhaling sharply. That's the other side. Two files, buried deep in forgotten layers of the Countdown's architecture. One reinforcing divine control, the other proving bureaucratic intervention. Neither should exist. Elias flexed his fingers, staring at the screen. So, which one is real? Mariana's voice was quiet, measured. What if they both are? Elias shook his head. That's impossible. There can't be two separate forces controlling the Countdown. One has to be the illusion. Mariana typed another command, attempting to trace the origin of both files. The system hesitated, then responded with a chilling result. Both documents have been edited, and both edits have been made by different hands. Elias exhaled slowly. Someone's been rewriting history. Mariana met his gaze. Then the real question isn't which version is true. It's who changed the story and why. The next day, Elias and Mariana wasted no time. They had seen too much to hesitate. Elias sat at his terminal, bypassing standard access controls, his fingers moving faster than usual. Mariana stood beside him, running secondary scripts, tracking who had modified the contradictory files and when the edits were made. We're in, Mariana muttered. A list of changes appeared. Elias narrowed his eyes. These timestamps. They go back decades, Mariana finished. Some files were altered last year, some 5 years ago. But look at these. She pointed to a set of older entries. They were ancient, predating even the publicly known history of the Countdown. Mariana's voice was quiet. This system existed long before we thought it did. Elias inhaled sharply. Then the question isn't just who changed the story. It's who wrote it to begin with. Mariana pulled up the authorized access logs. Government clearances. Religious operatives. Names. Real names. Of people who had been granted the ability to rewrite records. She hovered over a particularly old entry. This name isn't in our personnel database. Elias frowned. What do you mean? Mariana shook her head. Whoever made this edit, they don't officially exist. Before Elias could respond, his monitor flickered. For a second, the entire facility dimmed. Not physically, but it felt like something shifted. Then, another message appeared. Unauthorized access detected. Elias's pulse kicked up. Mariana typed fast, locking down their terminal. We need to finish the second experiment, now. Elias didn't hesitate. He ran the replication script, pushing the system, forcing it to mimic the past edits they had uncovered. The Countdown reacted immediately. Timestamps across live feeds fluctuated. Only slightly, but enough to be noticed. Then, scattered throughout their logs, words began appearing. Not warnings. Not directives. Names. Names of people who had been erased. People who, according to official records, had never existed at all. Mariana sucked in a breath. Elias. I see it, he whispered. They weren't just uncovering manipulation. They were uncovering forgotten lives. Elias clenched his fists. Someone had rewritten history. And now, history was fighting back. Elias hadn't slept. He could feel it in the way his thoughts struggled to organize themselves, in the faint tremor in his hands as he stared at the terminal. The names were still there. The countdown had acknowledged them, resurrecting fragments of identities that should not exist. But someone else had noticed their work too. Mariana sat beside him, scrolling through logs, her jaw tight. I don't like this. Elias glanced at her. What part? Mariana hesitated. The fact that we're seeing this. Elias exhaled slowly, drumming his fingers against the desk. You think the system wants us to see it? No, she muttered. I think someone wants us to think we uncovered it. That unsettled him. The idea that this wasn't just a mistake, a crack in the foundation, but a deliberate breadcrumb left for them to follow. Before he could respond, his screen flickered. A low, almost imperceptible disruption. A message. But this time, it wasn't from the countdown. It wasn't system-generated. It was external. Elias stared at the terminal, his breath slow and measured. The message sat on the screen in stark simplicity. Elias Reed. We need to talk. No signature. No sender information. Just a quiet demand lurking between layers of encrypted data. Mariana shifted beside him, arms crossed, eyes sharp. That's not an internal message. Elias exhaled through his nose, nodding. Whoever had sent it didn't use standard communication protocols. This wasn't from the initiative. It wasn't from their usual oversight systems. It was something else. Mariana leaned in, running a diagnostic trace. There's no origin point. Elias frowned. No transmission logs. None. He clenched his jaw. That wasn't possible. Every message, every file, left behind something. A source, a fingerprint, a timestamp. But this was clean. Too clean. Maybe it's part of the countdown's response, Elias offered, though even he didn't believe it. Mariana scoffed. The countdown doesn't send cryptic invitations. The screen flickered. Just once. Then settled. Elias's pulse kicked up. Mariana saw it too. Someone's watching. Elias flexed his fingers. Or waiting. Silence stretched between them. Then, as if responding to their hesitation, the screen flickered again. A new message. Don't ignore this. Mariana exhaled sharply. Okay, that's unsettling. Elias sat back, running his hand through his hair. He needed to decide. He could respond, could acknowledge whoever was watching, or he could pretend he hadn't seen it, and risk what happens when they don't like being ignored. Elias stared at the flickering message, the weight of the words pressing against his mind. Don't ignore this. Mariana paced, arms crossed, her expression tight. You're not seriously thinking about answering, are you? Elias didn't look at her. If I don't, they'll escalate. Mariana scoffed, stopping beside his desk. That's exactly why we shouldn't respond. We don't know who they are, Elias. We barely know what we're dealing with. Elias exhaled, rolling his shoulders. We know enough. Mariana shook her head, frustration flickering in her eyes. No, we don't. We don't know how deep this goes, or who's pulling the strings. What if this isn't a warning? What if it's a trap? Elias flexed his fingers, tapping the terminal absent-mindedly. He understood her concern. She was cautious, measured, but she wasn't willing to take the risk. I have to do this, he said quietly. Mariana's brows furrowed. What? Elias met her gaze, holding it steady. Because I need to know. She searched his face, then sighed, rubbing her temples. If you answer them, you could be walking straight into something we can't fix. Elias nodded once. Then I'll make sure I don't walk in blind. Without waiting for her approval, he turned back to the terminal, fingers moving swiftly over the keyboard. Who are you? Simple. Direct. No emotion. The screen flickered. Then, a response. Someone who knows what you found. Elias clenched his jaw. Someone. Not a group name. Not an organization. Not a faction. Just someone. Even as he typed his next message, his secondary script ran beneath the surface, tracking transmission points, searching for an origin. What do you want? A pause. Then, to offer you something. Elias inhaled slowly. His tracker ran deeper, scanning for breaches, looking for fingerprints in the code. Nothing. No source. No coordinates. No trail. Mariana leaned over, watching his screen. Anything. Elias shook his head. Whoever sent this, they're clean. Too clean. Mariana exhaled sharply. That means they're advanced. And that means this isn't just about the countdown. Elias typed one final message. If you have something to offer, say it. The response came fast. Meet us. Then decide. The terminal went dark. Elias and Mariana sat in silence. Then Mariana muttered, "You're actually going, aren't you?" Elias exhaled. Yes. Elias stood outside the designated meeting point, a quiet corner of the city where light barely reached between towering steel and glass structures. The world around him felt the same, calculated, orderly. But there was something different tonight. A presence. He had arrived alone. Mariana had wanted to follow, but Elias refused. If this was a trap, there was no reason to drag her into it. A figure emerged from the shadows. Well-dressed, poised, unrushed. The kind of person who spoke carefully, measuring every word before releasing it. Elias Reed, the man greeted, his voice calm. "We've been watching your progress." Elias clenched his jaw. "I figured." The man motioned toward a nearby bench, an invitation rather than an order. Elias didn't move. "You've uncovered things that weren't meant to be found," the man continued. "Which means you already understand that the world you live in isn't what it seems." Elias crossed his arms. "You could have sent a message instead of playing spy." The man smiled faintly. "Would you have listened?" Elias narrowed his eyes. "I'm listening now. Say what you want." The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled something from his pocket. A small, sleek device, almost like a medical scanner. He pressed a button, and a holographic projection materialized in front of Elias. It was a file. His file. "Your package," the man said. Elias's heart hammered once before he forced himself to stay composed. "What is this?" "Your life." The man tilted his head slightly. "Or rather, pieces of the one you lived before." Elias inhaled slowly, keeping his expression unreadable. "Is this supposed to convince me?" "It's proof." "Proof." That word felt heavy in his chest. "You're not the first to go looking," the man continued. "But you were the first in a long time to get this far. Which means you have a choice." Elias clenched his fists, tension rippling through his shoulders. "Stop talking in circles." "What choice?" The man held his gaze, then finally said it. "You can expose everything. Tear down the illusion. Reveal the truth to those still living inside it. Or you can know who you were. Why you're here. What price was paid for you to exist again." Elias exhaled slowly. He had spent his entire career chasing facts, seeking the truth in data. Now, the truth was staring back at him. And it was a choice. Elias had never been reckless, but tonight, he was dangerously close to it. Sitting in the dim light of his lab, fingers moving fast over encrypted logs, he began securing everything. Every trace of what he and Mariana had uncovered. He knew the offer wasn't just a question of truth. It was a question of what would be erased if he accepted it. He copied files into hidden partitions, embedded fragments within buried layers of archived data, scattering pieces of the truth where others, when the time came, might find them. Mariana hadn't spoken much since the meeting. She just watched Elias work, waiting for him to say something that confirmed what she feared, that he was already slipping into uncertainty. "You're thinking about it, aren't you?" she asked finally. Elias didn't look up. "I don't know." Mariana exhaled sharply, running a hand through her hair. "No, you do. You just don't want to admit it." Elias paused. His fingers hovered over the terminal before he clenched his jaw and pushed himself up from the chair. "I need real answers," he muttered. Mariana narrowed her eyes. "And you think they'll give them to you?" Elias grabbed his coat. "They don't have a choice." The meeting point wasn't the same this time. It was darker, quieter, deliberate. Elias wasn't alone, but he wasn't fully aware of who was watching from the shadows either. Then, she appeared. A woman, poised, controlled, an unsettling calm in her posture. She wasn't the man from last time. She was something else entirely. She studied Elias for a lingering moment before speaking. "Dr. Elias Reed, my name is Cassandra Ward. You want more than breadcrumbs." Elias crossed his arms. "If you're going to manipulate me, at least do it honestly." She smiled faintly. "I don't need to manipulate you, Dr. Reed. You already know the truth. You just haven't accepted it yet." Elias clenched his jaw. "Then say it." She tilted her head slightly. "Your life, Elias, this world, everything you know, exists inside a controlled simulation. a program designed to run cycles of existence for those granted entry. Elias's breath was steady, but his pulse wasn't. That's just theory, he muttered. No one's ever proven. She stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. We control the program, Elias. We build it. You're not discovering something unknown. You are discovering what was always intended. Silence stretched between them. Elias exhaled slowly, feeling a weight in his chest that hadn't been there before. So that's it, he muttered. Every decision, every moment relegated to lines of code. She watched him carefully. You still have a choice. Elias frowned. What choice? To know who you were. The words cut deeper than he expected. She gestured toward the device she held. A sleek terminal, humming softly. I have your records, Elias. Your real life. All the memories you gave up when you entered this world. Not just pieces. Elias flexed his fingers, tension threading through his muscles. He had fought so hard for truth. But what if the truth wasn't what he wanted? Elias hadn't sat down. He wasn't sure if he could. The woman who knows everything stood calmly before him, her presence measured, deliberate. She was not impatient. She was not hurried. She had been waiting for this moment far longer than he had. I know you want answers, she said, folding her hands neatly. But be careful, because once you hear them, you won't be able to unsee them. Elias exhaled slowly. Tell me anyway. She nodded once, accepting his resolve. Then listened carefully. The program was created nearly a century ago, she began. A private initiative, funded by the brightest minds in artificial intelligence, neuroscience, and biomedical technology. The goal was simple, to preserve life beyond the limits of the body. Elias's fingers curled into fists. Cryostasis. She nodded. In the beginning, yes. Patients with terminal illnesses, failing bodies, people with wealth and power who couldn't accept mortality, all placed into advanced preservation chambers, waiting for a future where their conditions could be cured. Elias knew this. The concept wasn't foreign, but her tone suggested it wasn't the whole story. She continued. But preservation came with complications. Bodies deteriorated in stasis. Consciousness wasn't guaranteed. Even if we revived them, their minds, their very identities, would be fractured. She paused, watching Elias absorb the weight of her words. So, a different solution was proposed. A digital transference. Their minds, their essence, uploaded into a fully simulated world while their bodies remained frozen. Elias swallowed. His pulse had steadied, but it wasn't comfortable. They sold it as a second life. She nodded. A chance to exist. To think, to feel, to be, without waiting decades for revival. It was marketed as a paradise, a place where people could live new lives until science found a way to heal them. Elias forced his voice to stay even. And then, her expression didn't shift. Then came the corruption. The program was never supposed to be permanent. It was a bridge, a waiting room before revival. She hesitated, then continued. But money changed everything. Elias felt the tension coil in his spine. He already knew where this was going. The research facility behind the program, now known as Elysium Systems, realized something. She tilted her head slightly. If people didn't wake up, if their real bodies stayed frozen indefinitely, this could become more than just temporary preservation. It could become a commodity. Elias clenched his jaw. They rebranded it. They erased the original mission. They stopped calling it cryostasis and started selling it as a product, a purchased afterlife, where existence could be bought, shaped, and controlled. He exhaled sharply. The packages. She smiled faintly. Yes. The more you paid in the real world, the more time you were granted inside the simulation. Those who could afford luxury packages lived long, fulfilling second lives. Those who paid less lived brief, fragile existences before their countdown expired. Elias ran a hand through his hair, his breath uneven. And the worst part, she continued, voice softer now, no one inside the simulation remembers buying their way in. They wake up believing they were born here. Elias steadied himself. Elysium Systems still runs it. Yes, she answered. They oversee everything, the countdown, the system modifications, the identities granted to new arrivals. Their AI handles population balance, lifespan adjustments, and data integrity. They decide who gets to exist and who doesn't. Elias exhaled through his nose, grounding himself against the onslaught of information. And if someone finds out the truth, he asked. She studied him for a long moment. Then they're offered what you're being offered now. Silence. Elias swallowed. A choice. She nodded. You can destroy this illusion, expose Elysium, dismantle the system, give people the truth. Her voice remained steady, but Elias could hear the weight beneath it. Or, she continued, you can walk away, reclaim your real past, and let this world remain as it is. Elias inhaled slowly, his pulse no longer steady. Which path keeps me alive? He asked quietly. She gave him a knowing look. You already know the answer. Elias sat in his apartment, staring at the faint glow of the countdown in the corner of his vision. It ticked on, steady, indifferent, just as it always had. But now, he knew what it really was. The days blurred together. He hadn't answered his terminal, hadn't responded to Mariana's messages. He had barely moved. Mariana had come by twice. The first time, she knocked for a long while before leaving. The second time, she spoke through the door, firm, frustrated. I know you're in there, Elias. He didn't move. She exhaled sharply, her voice quieter. Whatever they told you, whatever they offered, I need you to think, really think, before you do something irreversible. He closed his eyes. She sighed, leaning against the door. You fought so hard to find the truth. Don't let them take it from you now. Elias swallowed, pressing his fingers into his temples. She left after that, and he stayed, knowing she wouldn't see him again. The night before he was scheduled to leave, Elias secured everything he could. It wasn't much, just fragments of hidden data, encrypted logs buried where only Mariana would think to look. If they wiped his records, if they erased his existence from the initiative's history, she would know where to search. A single message sat on his desk, written in the simplest form possible. Don't stop. It's all there. He hesitated before adding the last line. Goodbye. No names. No explanations. Just a quiet assurance that someone had fought, and someone still could. Then, Elias stepped outside for the last time. Elias didn't remember the moment he stepped out of the simulation. He remembered the feeling, a wrenching sensation, like reality had turned itself inside out, pulling him through layers of something that wasn't entirely physical. He couldn't breathe, couldn't see, couldn't hear anything except the deep, hollow sound of movement that didn't belong to him. Then darkness. Cold. A static hum vibrating at the edges of perception. Elias gasped, his lungs burning, his limbs heavy and foreign. He blinked rapidly, his vision blurred, his body wrong, disjointed, sluggish. Was he awake? No, he had always been awake. But now, for the first time, he wasn't the person he had been. The world around him was different. Not glass walls and digital interfaces, but sterile metal, quiet machinery, figures moving in the periphery of his fractured consciousness. Someone spoke. He didn't process the words. Hands steadied him. He hated how his body felt. Too real. Too fragile. Too much. A voice, clearer now. Elias. You're here. Cassandra. Elias swallowed, his throat raw, his pulse erratic. Where? She answered before he finished asking. You're in the real world.